Okay, so we talked about the nutrients coming into our digestive system in our food. Now let's talk about the digestive system itself and the process of digestion. Food enters our digestive system through the mouth and is carried to our stomach by the esophagus. After it is broken down in the stomach, it passes into the small intestines, then the large intestines, and finally the rectum and anus. But there are also other supporting organs in the digestive system: the salivary glands, gallbladder, liver, and pancreas. Food doesn't move through these organs, but they help in the digestion process. The process of taking in food, extracting nutrients, and getting rid of waste happens in 4 steps. First, we have ingestion, where food is taken in. Then the food is digested. Once it's broken down, the nutrients are absorbed and transported to cells around the body. And finally, the wastes that are left over are excreted or eliminated. The first step, ingestion, takes place in the mouth and the esophagus. But there's some overlap here between ingestion and digestion. While we take in food in our mouth, we are also starting the digestion process by breaking that food down into smaller pieces using our teeth. Our salivary glands also secrete saliva, which lubricates the food before it travels down the esophagus. But the saliva is also starting to chemically digest the food as well before we even swallow it. It contains enzymes that catalyze chemical reactions, starting to break the food down. Animal teeth, or other structures for breaking food apart, like the mandibles in insects, are specialized for that animal's diet. Carnivores tend to have large, sharp teeth for tearing flesh. Herbivores tend to have wide, flat teeth for grinding up plants. Omnivores, like us, have both kinds of teeth. After we finish chewing food, we need to swallow it for it to travel down our esophagus. At the top of the esophagus is a flap of cartilage that functions like a trapdoor to keep food from going down the trachea and into the lungs instead. When you swallow, the epiglottis closes, blocking off the trachea and sending food into the esophagus. I'll include a video after this lecture that will show you how the epiglottis works. Food travels down the esophagus and is helped along by peristalsis, which is contractions of smooth muscles along the esophagus. The muscles contract in waves, pushing the food down to the stomach. There will be a video after this lecture showing you what peristalsis looks like. Before food enters the stomach, it passes through the lower esophageal sphincter. A sphincter is a ring of muscles that can open and close to regulate the flow of food or other substances through the body. The lower esophageal sphincter closes behind the food and prevents stomach acid from traveling up the esophagus. So when you have acid reflux or heartburn, stomach acid is getting through your lower esophageal sphincter and irritating your esophagus. We started the digestion process in the mouth with the teeth and saliva, but most of the digestion occurs in the stomach. The stomach breaks down food both physically and chemically. Muscles around the stomach push on the food and churn the stomach contents to physically break it down. Stomach acid helps kill bacteria on the food and breaks it down chemically. So where does stomach acid come from? It's produced by gastric glands lining the stomach's epithelium. These glands are found at the bottom of gastric pits, which are crevices in the stomach lining. The gastric glands produce 2 different chemicals that make up the stomach acid. The first is hydrochloric acid, which is a very strong acid. If you look at the pH scale here, you can see that hydrochloric acid has a pH around 1. The other chemical is pepsinogen. Once pepsinogen is released by the gastric glands, it is quickly converted into pepsin, an enzyme that starts breaking down proteins into their amino acids. By the time food is broken down and digested enough to leave the stomach for the small intestines, it's a creamy, acidic mixture known as chyme. At the bottom of the stomach, we also have another sphincter, the pyloric sphincter, which opens and closes to allow chyme to pass into the intestines. It prevents too much stomach acid from flowing into the small intestines. But food is not completely done digesting yet. It has been broken down into a mushy chyme, and some chemical breakdown has started. But most of the chemical breakdown of food actually happens in the small intestines. The small intestines are very long, about 20 feet in most humans. As food travels down this long, narrow tube, it continues to be digested. The pancreas is also important for this process. It's located near where the stomach and small intestines meet, and is connected to the small intestines by a duct that secretes pancreatic juice into the small intestines. Pancreatic juice has two functions. One, it helps neutralize the stomach acid so that it doesn't irritate the small intestines. It also helps break down carbohydrates and proteins. However, it is less good at breaking down fats. The liver also contributes some fluid that helps with digestion in the small intestines. It produces bile, which is secreted into the gallbladder. The gallbladder releases bile into the small intestines. Bile helps break down fats into smaller globs that can be better digested by the pancreatic juices. Now pause the video and answer this question. Just like in the esophagus, muscles help move digesting food through the small intestines by peristalsis. By the time food passes through the small intestine, the large complex molecules have been broken down into smaller nutrients. Proteins are broken down into amino acids. Fats are broken down into fatty acids. And sugars are broken down into simple sugars. These nutrients are now small enough to be absorbed into the bloodstream and used by cells. The process of absorption starts in the small intestines. Some molecules might be absorbed as early as in the stomach. For example, alcohol can be absorbed directly into the bloodstream from the stomach, which is why it can be dangerous to drink on an empty stomach. To maximize absorption, the small intestines have very high surface area. For a molecule to pass into the blood, it needs to come into direct contact with the plasma membrane of a cell. So the greater the surface area, the more molecules can pass through at any time. Let's look at how surface area increases the rate of absorption. If you look at this example on the top, imagine the red line is the wall of the small intestine, and the blue circles are nutrients trying to pass through into the blood. Only 12 molecules can pass through at one time. But in the example on the bottom, we have increased the surface area by creating protrusions, but length of the small intestines is the same. With this increased surface area, now 18 molecules can pass through at the same time. The small intestine is narrow, so it increases its surface area by having many small projections. The villi are finger-like projections that line the inner surface of the small intestines. If we zoom in on the villi, we see that the individual cells also have small projections called microvilli. Both of these increase the surface area for absorption. Now answer this question about surface area in the small intestine. But absorption isn't complete by the time food gets to the end of the small intestines. In the large intestines, the absorption process continues, and waste also comes together to be eliminated. We talked before about how humans and most animals have beneficial bacteria living in their digestive systems. Most of the microorganisms in our digestive system are found in our large intestines. They feed on undigested food and in return secrete chemicals and vitamins that are important for our health. Water balance is very important in the large intestines as waste is prepared for elimination. If too much water is removed, the waste becomes too solid and it's difficult to move through the large intestines. This might cause constipation. However, if not enough water is removed, the waste is too liquid, causing diarrhea and often dehydration. Salt concentrations in the colon regulate water absorption. If there is too little water in the colon and salt concentrations are high, water moves into the colon by osmosis. If water concentrations are too high in the colon and salt concentrations are too low, water will diffuse into the colon. Here's another question about concentration gradients. This topic comes up a lot in biology. So what is left over at the end? What is poop made of? Well, it contains fiber, which is plant carbohydrates that we can't digest. It also contains some water, which helps the waste move through the large intestines. It contains some bile, which tends to bind to the fiber, and it contains dead microorganisms from the large intestine.